Hi. It's
How you
weird
doing,
here
Gray?
without Zane.
Where's Zane?
Zane's out. It's just
He's
us.
out?
It's just us.
Well, who's gonna say the good morning, good evening, or good? Oh, okay. Good morning,
Okay.
good evening, good night, wherever you are. I don't have the spiel, but welcome to CIQ discussion about a lot of things, really. I'm sorry, I'm not good at these intros. I need Zane to help, man.
I'm not either. That's why as soon as you started, I was like, yay, Skip's going to do it. So,
And
hi,
Hey, how's it
everybody.
going?
Brian's here to save us.
So, we've had some news come in over the end of last week. Who wants to summarize the news for us?
I suppose so. I'll do it.
Skip, you take it, Skip.
So I'm speaking from a technical standpoint here, and we'll talk about possible legal ramifications or whatnot, license issues later. It's from a technical standpoint, up until now, the source code for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which is based mostly off of GPL software, copyleft for those of you who don't know, is available or was available on git.centos.org. It's the place they've traditionally published it. And downstream rebuilders such as Rocky Linux, Alma Linux, Oracle Linux, I think, although I'm not sure. I don't want to speak for any other project. I know Rocky for sure has traditionally used that source code in order to rebuild our distro, which is an exact clone of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We aim to build the same versions as Red Hat because Red Hat has created a standard and an ecosystem around their product or their distro. And the announcement came up, I think it was last Wednesday, a week and a day ago now, was that, hey, we're not going to, that git.centos.org thing, we're just not going to do that anymore. And there was a lot of uproar about that. There was a kerfluffle, as they say. And obviously Rocky was kind of at the forefront of it because, we, in order to maintain our distro, we use Red Hat shared source code under the terms of the GPL and other copyleft agreements. And so that is what happened. I don't know if anyone else wants to. I've talked for enough now. Does anyone else want to talk about the reaction to it, either technically or on the internet? It's been all kinds of things flying around on the internet this week.
Absolutely, there has indeed. Brian, it's okay. There was a side channel. Brian didn't know he was on camera, so. So hi, Brian.
I wonder if he's okay.
So Skip's sentiment on this.
Apologies. It's 3 a.m. for me, so still assembling coffee. There we go.
Brian's in Japan for anybody else who doesn't.
Cheers, my friend.
Unaware. He's really here.
So, first thing we want to mention is please post comments. Please post questions. We're here to answer questions. We're here to share anything that we know. Anything we know. I don't know. I don't know very much overall, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, so ask questions if you want. We'll post them on screen and go ahead and answer them. So yeah, as Skip was alluding to, there was a lot of discussions and comments that's emerged as a result of this. My personal feeling is that I think a lot of it is, I'm going to be blunt, a little drama-y. It made it sound like it was a giant deal, and of course, at first we were kind of scared over it, but it turns out it actually wasn't. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a change for us. Yeah, we have to make some changes. We could talk about that a little bit if people want, but I saw some titles of articles, Red Hat is, don't quote me on any of these because it's all a blur right now, but, Red Hat's changes are, disrupting the enterprise Linux ecosystem, all of the downstream Linux distributions as a result are going to be affected. They're all going to be blown away. We're all going to go away. And no, not at all. As a matter of fact, yes, it took us a little bit to see and to come up with a plan. I want to give major props out to the community. I mean, yeah, we have to do a little bit more manual work as a result of this. But the community, our team has found several really good options in terms of pathways to move forward. So how's this going to change Rocky Linux in terms of what we're providing to the community? Actually, not at all. You're not going to see any changes based on the changes from Red Hat. Everything will continue exactly as it has. And on the back end, we're doing things a little bit differently. But that's about it. I don't know, Skip, Brian, if you want to add any context there, but
from the end user perspective, you're same Rocky Linux. Mission
Right.
hasn't changed.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Things were back to normal, but within about 18 hours, I believe. Unless you count the 2 weeks beforehand, before we realized that was the actual change. Beforehand, we just thought it was a mistake when we saw stuff stopped getting published to git.centos.org.
Yeah, and sorry, I did not put my tagline on here, but I'm a member of the Rocky Linux community release engineering team, and obviously we watch for source code changes closely. And yeah, we did notice it was about 10 days, 2 weeks, somewhere in there, before this change was announced, right? And there were questions internally for sure, like, hey, what's going on? Like, and we assumed it was a bug or something, but I guess it was not a bug. It was just not going to publish there anymore. So.
See, so I hear from the back end team that we've got some questions. So I'm going to pause there. Gotcha. So this is a good one. So there's a number of questions that we've been getting a lot. And this is definitely, I'm glad we're kind of starting with this one. I'm going to give my high level version of this. I'm going to ask Skip to jump in and provide additional context and whatnot. But in terms of how this is going to affect Rocky Linux development, in a nutshell, as Skip said, originally, we just got all of our sources from predominantly one location, which was the CentOS stream Git. This affects us by now. We have to go to multiple different sources to get those RPMs or source RPMs and the sources and whatnot. The CentOS stream Git is still absolutely one of the locations we're going to. And as we're finding that there's a lot of packages that are still aligned very well with that. And I think Skip can go into more detail on that if interested and if needed. But it means, though, that the packages that aren't in stream, we have to go to other sources. Now, the first thing that I want to just mention is Red Hat is distributing these sources to everybody who has access to their binaries, namely their customers. And as part of the customer contract, you have to agree that you are not going to redistribute or share those binaries or source code or artifacts beyond the systems that you are entitled to based on your licensing. So first off, I want to say, like, from a GPL perspective, from a licensing perspective, there's a lot of discussions on, is this actually imposing additional limitations on the GPL? And according to the GPL, a lot of people say that that's not allowed. You can't do that. So I'm going to just leave this off the table right now. We don't know if this is in alignment with the GPL or not. But what I can say definitively is this isn't in alignment with the open source spirit and the intentions of many of the upstream developers and contributors. And we don't agree with it. We don't not want to agree or sign something that's going to limit our rights according to the GPL and other open source licenses. So we are not we're not doing anything that would cause us to have to agree to those terms. So the question then is, well, where do you get those sources from? Luckily, there's several different ways you can still get those sources. I'll just name a couple of them. I don't want to preempt a release that the Rocky Enterprise community is putting out here very, very shortly now, possibly even
Release.
while we're talking.
Release meaning press release, not
Well, a
not
blog or
releases in software.
oh yeah, sorry.
Yes.
I have drank from the cup
My
of
mind went there.
I've drank from the cup of management. A PR to me now, yeah, means a press release. Sorry, everybody. I know, Skip. You know how many times this has bit me. Okay, so no, a press release or a blog announcement. We're doing an announcement here that's going to give a little bit more context in terms of what we're doing. But I'll preview it here a little bit, and I guess if people want, that you can ask questions and we can go into it. But there's a number of places where you can get Red Hat Enterprise Linux without agreeing to these terms, which we do not want to agree with. We feel as though it violates our rights and limits our ability to do things within an open source context. So we don't want to agree to that. So how do you get Red Hat binaries and Red Hat source code without agreeing to that? Well, there's a couple ways. One is you use the Universal Base Container Image, UBI images. Those are distributed for free. Once you download the UBI image, you can then go ahead and proceed and obtain your source code, even just using DNF. Another model that you could use is cloud instances. Many of the cloud providers do not require you to agree to Red Hat's terms in order to use pay for instance or pay for time for those cloud instances. So you can get at it that way as well. So long story short, we've got multiple sources in which we're going to get those sources, and we're going to be taking those and then adding them back into our Git, debranding, and then making them public.
It should be noted too, the most obvious one is the public CentOS Stream Git repository on GitLab. It has, depends on the package, but many of the packages they don't have tags, but you can figure out which version you need via, if you want to match Red Hat Enterprise Linux by checking through Git commit history and finding the version that you're after, analyzing spec files and so forth. And so that is also it's kind of the primary option for the packages that's relevant to.
Yeah.
But the as Greg said, multiple ways on the back end now.
So again, going back to the question, how does it affect our development? It affects our development by basically we just now have to go to multiple locations to get the original source code and or the upstream source code, and then we bring it into the build system Peridot, and everything goes exactly as it has been. So there's not much disruption to the users and to the community. A little bit more on our back end, but that's totally fine. No issue at all. That's what we're here for. How does it affect CIQ? Doesn't really. From a CIQ perspective, we're basically leveraging the Rocky Linux as a community project. We contribute to that project. So I guess how does it affect us? Well, Skip, Brian, Neil, and other people that are employed by CIQ to work on Rocky, I guess, have to spend a little bit more time dealing with this. But for the most part, not only them, but the whole community is dealing with it. From a customer perspective of CIQ, there's no issue at all. Yeah, it's business as usual. Oh, there's a lot of questions. So will Rocky still be bug for bug?
Hi,
yes.
Dave. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
I recognize names.
So yes, absolutely. It's still the same code.
Yep. It's everything that we set out to do.
Go ahead.
Everything we set out to do is exactly the same. And Skip, over to you. You were.
I guess it's like, ad nauseum now, but yeah, the mission of the project has not changed since its inception, right? We are here, we read it on the website. If we mission the project does change, it will be on the website. It'll be very loud, right? We keep everyone up to date about what we're doing because we're not here to fool anyone, right?
I also just want to make a point too. If something regards our mission or changes, something regards anything major about the project, go to rockylinux.org. Because believe me, we will be posting about it if there's anything that's a major issue to the project. There's been the one thing I have seen is there's a lot of clickbait going on right now, a lot of FUD to some extent. And yeah, I mean, this is a big deal. It sets a negative precedent in at least my mind. But for the most part, I mean, again, nothing's really changed from a project perspective or a community perspective.
I will say I'm gonna segue for a minute into I've gotten I've noticed two reactions to this news, and they're both wrong, and they're both wrong in completely different ways. The first reaction that I saw was, "Oh God, well I guess Rocky Linux is dead now. Pack it up, everybody. We're going home." Right? Like it's not true. And again, if Rocky Linux is in danger of dying, it will be on the website. Talk to our people. Like we're very open about it. If anyone who has been involved in our project or on our chat system or whatever, like we shoot the breeze a lot. Right? We are very, I don't want to I don't want to deny all the technical work we're doing, but we are quite upfront about what what we think about things and what where the direction of the project and so forth. So yeah, please check us out if you're at all wondering about what's going on. So that's, again, as we said, that Rocky Linux is dying. I guess it's time for all the other rebuilds to pack it up or whatever. I don't think that's true. The other reaction I've heard to this is, oh, you guys are just whining because now they moved their Git repository to CentOS Stream, them being Red Hat here. And this is nothing, right? This is no problem, right? What are you whining about? Just pick out the commit that you want. And that's also not accurate. And I can get into why that's not accurate later, but segue preview, right? But yeah, so both of those takes are completely, and they come from different sides of the community, I guess. And
I
but
think the
both
first one
inaccurate.
seems to come from people trying to sell articles. So there you go.
Possibly, yeah.
It definitely gets lots of clicks. So there you go. Pronouncing the death of Rocky Linux. But I think
it's big news.
We've seen that many times though. So
I'm gonna say this only because it is true, but the ones that I see kind of mostly on the attack, and it hasn't been very nice, and I wish it was different. Are people that just work at Red Hat, and I just want to just extend a message, like we're trying to help, right? And we're trying to help the community. We're working with the community. We're trying to make sure that everybody has free access to a belief that we have, which is open source is free. Open source is open, and it should always be that way. And we understand that it's not Red Hat's priority to ensure that the whole world has access to this, but to hide it behind a paywall is not really the right course of action. But you don't have to worry about it because we're here to help. We're here to help that community, and I don't mean that in a sarcastic or anything way. Like for real, like there's a lot of value in having everybody from the anybody involved with open source and enterprise Linux to just know that there is a Red Hat product out there, and they can use that, they can leverage that. But that enterprise Linux community is not bisected because we're all focusing on that same level of compatibility, and there's value to all of us by having that. So I feel as though that's a really important statement to make. Worst case, if all else fails with Rocky as a public downstream of EL, is there an option to use Peridot for sites to build locally, access to source code? Oh, that's an interesting idea. So yes, I mean, people could do that, but the question really is just, actually, it's a really interesting idea. But the question is really just, is that where everybody wants to spend their time? There's quite a bit of, it's not turnkey, and Skip and it can elaborate on this quite a bit, I think. There's a lot of work involved. So when you have a single package or single project and you go and download, the source code, Git, whatever, or tarball, release tarball, you're pretty confident that you can do I'm going to date myself a little bit, but a configure, make, install. And you're pretty convinced like that should work. It should work. But when building the whole operating system where you have a ridiculous graph of dependencies between packages and specific versions of packages and what the outcome of each one of those builds will be, depending on how you built the previous 10 packages, it's a very difficult kind of problem to solve. Yeah, there's a bunch of automation that we can put into that and whatnot, but hopefully nobody will ever have to build their own EL distro in their own organization. I think that there's much better ways. And to be clear on this, if all else fails, and I'm not going to say with Rocky as a public downstream, but maybe I'll just say if all else fails, meaning Red Hat has gone completely nuclear and there's no option whatsoever to distribute that source code. Yeah, we actually have several different layers of contingency plans, and we feel very confident that Rocky Linux as an EL distribution, an enterprise Linux distribution, will always be available. And hopefully that means we are always compatible with the rest of the EL ecosystem. But if organizations and companies make that impossible, then we will continue to be here doing what we do until the community says otherwise.
We really like it. And
it's fun.
To counterbalance what Greg is saying as well, it should be noted that Red Hat as a company, as they stress in their communications, they are great at upstream commitments. They have, a lot of great engineers, obviously, working for them. Many thousands of engineers even. And it's, they are very good citizens about, again, as their communication stress, they're quite right. They lead or contribute to countless open source projects, and it's really important. Like they're a really great citizen for doing that. We only have a quibble about this. And I'll explain later. It's a relatively small piece of source, right? But it's important though. It's important. And again, the license that we're talking about, GPL and similar copyleft licenses, they don't allow exceptions just because you're really great, right? You could be the best contributor ever, and really as a corporation, Red Hat probably is, I think, pound for pound, percentage wise, the best upstream committer, best upstream producer, I guess, that I'm aware of. There are tons of other companies obviously that can contribute upstream, but again, you don't get exceptions just because you're good, right? Like the licensing does not work that way. So I'm just sorry, don't mean to rant.
Do you foresee the future getting progressively worse over time? For instance, do you expect to see the various other sources for SRC, for source packaging, being removed over time, requiring new sources?
I hope not.
I'm going to be clear on this. So, and I'm also trying to choose my words pedantically. There are options. There has been options from day one for Red Hat to completely obliterate any possible downstream derivative of Red Hat. They can legally do it. I don't think they will do it. I think that they would. The black eye that they received over just doing this is nothing, I think, compared to the hurt that they would have by the community if they really close their sources. To be clear on that, like
there would also
copy
be
left
issues as well.
Well, the GPL requires it, but
it.
Not all packages inside of Enterprise Linux are copy left. So that means that they could hold those back completely. So there are a few things that they can do. It would be very hard for a rebuild to remain. And I'll say it like this: remain bug for bug compatible. Is it still possible to remain API ABI compatible? Absolutely. CentOS Stream is we've got commitment from Red Hat that they're going to continue that. And worst case scenario, even if that goes away, we've got contingency plans. It would require a lot more buy-in from the rest of the open source community, but that's a possibility. Well, I'll say it's a contingency. We hope it's never a possibility. We hope it never happens. We don't want it to happen. There's a lot of advantage in having complete compatibility within this enterprise Linux ecosystem. As a matter of fact, when we first started, one of the options that we talked about was, do we just fork from this point? And do we just create something new? And, we discussed all the options and the pros and cons, and we didn't want to go into this with any sort of preconceived agenda. We were really just, there's a giant hole in the ecosystem now that CentOS is dead. How do we fix that hole? How do we solve that for people? And how do we help? So that was where this project really came from. And so we we debated the idea of forking or remaining compatible, and we decided to remain compatible for a variety of reasons. And a lot of that is to ease a lot of the pain points that people felt with CentOS A going away, but also pain points that they feel with Linux distributions in general, right? It's hard for ISVs and IHVs and vendors and even users and system administrators to deal with the fact that every distribution of Linux that they're working with kind of has an entirely different file system hierarchy, different structures and packages, different processes for how to manage and how to maintain those. So again, having that level of compatibility is an asset to everybody. I hope Red Hat feels the same in that sentiment, but from our perspective and from the community's perspective, that compatibility is important. Red Hat has inadvertently, maybe on purpose, but they've created a standard, and it is the standard of what does it mean to be enterprise Linux. We didn't want to deviate from that. We wanted to be in alignment with that. And again, it from our perspective, it supports Red Hat as much as it's supporting everybody within this ecosystem. And I think that's an important, very important facet.
And to be clear, I think it would actually be pretty difficult for them to entirely eliminate access to the source without, displeasing their customers enough. I mean, and we've come up with some wild and wacky ways to get the source, depending on how locked down it does get. But I don't think that's a very strong possibility.
I don't know if there's
Brian here, but
I don't know if there's another question, but I think it's also very important to mention something that's come up a number of times, which has to do with contributions upstream. So there has been some finger pointing going on, unfortunately, specifically at us, on looking at it from a perspective of, what are we giving back for this source code? And I've got a couple really strong opinions on this. The first one is open source does not, who gets access to open source is not relegated by what have you done for me lately. It has nothing to do, especially when we're talking about a company. It has nothing to do with that. The access to open source software is guaranteed both to contributors and developers, as well as to the community at large. And the community at large is usually helping those open source projects in many ways. It could be something as simple as they're just using it and just talking about it with friends, with
they used
colleagues.
to be called users for
users and advocates and whatnot. But it could also be documentation. It could be other things as well. But upstream means a lot of different things as well. So we've got a number of people, both in the Rocky community, that do contribute upstream. We've got a lot of users of Rocky Linux within our ecosystem that contribute to massive tons of projects upstream. Rocky Linux is absolutely helping the overall vision of open source and contributions back upstream. So I want to just really just kind of mention that and just kind of hopefully just put an end to that conversation thread, because it's really not true, and it's a fallacy anyway. So it's important for all of this to remain open, freely available, exactly as the license and intentions of those developers and contributors intended.
It's also worth noting that I'm going to add on to that if your metric for how good you are or how just or noble you are is your number of code contributions upstream, as in direct code contributions, like fix this bug in OpenSSL, involves a lot of C programming, or fix this kernel bug, whatever. Then yeah, the Rocky Linux project, I mean, as far as tech team goes, I'm here to tell you we're not the largest team, right? We are going to be, we have members that are Apple packagers. We have folks that produce, live images, Raspberry Pi images, all kinds of things like that. But it's, we kind of work on what we like to work on, right? And we don't have many, in fact, in the Rocky, I would say, membership tech team, the core tech team, there aren't many hardcore, folks that could, give them a complicated kernel bug and they'll come up with a fix. We don't have that. And I mean, I'm sorry, I wish we could hire that, but we don't, we don't. So it's really kind of a, I mean, if we're talking about lines of code contributed upstream, like actual code, and not like a kickstart or an image or something like that, that's or documentation or whatever, then yeah, it'll be that. But it's the wrong metric in my opinion to use. But by that metric, if you use just that metric, then yes, I mean I'm sorry, not many companies and projects have that kind of resource. So just want to expound out a bit on the point.
Be interesting to see how Oracle plans on handling this. They have the clout to pursue GPL enforcement and to be able to publish their derivative and source packages. Actually, that is one of the potential ways of additionally getting source packages. We've discussed, we've actually looked at it. At the end of the day, we're going to continue trying to be as close to Red Hat Enterprise Linux as this enterprise standard as we absolutely can. But yeah, that is absolutely another location as well to get this. But you're talking about the GPL and enforcement of the GPL. This is really a gray area still because this has not been challenged properly in court at this point. So we don't know kind of what is allowed and what is not allowed. It has not technically been decided upon, and there's a lot of debate happening within the community on, is this allowed according to the GPL or is this not allowed according to the GPL? And then balancing that. I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this whole thing turns out. But in the meantime, we still got a job to do. So we're going to figure out the best way of doing it in a way that doesn't conflict with anybody's contracts, requirements, or licenses. We're just trying to find the most neutral way forward. What happens when those third-party sources, cloud containers, et cetera, realize that they may be breaking the Red Hat terms to block the distribution of sources from their customers? So I think Red Hat has anticipated this. They've actually already stated and Brian and Skip, correct me if I'm wrong on this, please. They've stated that, for example, the UBI is a freely available distribution based on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and those Red Hat Enterprise Linux binaries are part of the UBI. And from the UBI, you can go and install pretty much the entire distribution if you want. So it's all kind of there at your fingertips. Could they block that? Could they say we're not going to distribute the sources? If they did, I think they would in fact be absolutely breaking the GPL because those binaries are available from anywhere. You can go to Docker Hub or any one of many registries, container registries, and pull those binaries and get access to them, and then install again. You can install the whole OS via that mechanism if you want, which means, again, according to the GPL, you have to have access to those sources. So I don't think that this is going to be a blocker. Now, would Red Hat say, well, we're no longer basing the UBI on Red Hat Enterprise Linux? Maybe they say that they're going to base it on CentOS Stream moving forward. That would be their prerogative, and they could. That's why we have multiple ways of solving this. The UBI method is simply one. Skip, Brian, anything you want to add on that?
Not really right now. Yeah, I have a barking dog, unfortunately.
Ascender and Fuzzball. So first thing I'm going to mention, I'm going to address Fuzzball first. I have a very, as you can imagine, I'm a very opinionated about open source. Nobody got that, huh? But I'm quite opinionated about open source. That doesn't mean I believe that everything has to be open source. But I believe if you're going to open source something, you should truly open source something. I've been consulted by many of companies, very large companies even, who have asked me advice on their open source strategy. And the advice that I usually give is if you are not comfortable with your competitors making more money on your work than you are, then don't open source it. It's okay. Keep it commercial. There's no harm in that, but don't open source it. As a matter of fact, we kind of go the full distance when it comes to open source at CIQ, and not to make this a pitch about CIQ, but just to kind of demonstrate how we feel about this. We contribute to multiple open source projects. We lead in terms of development and just what we're putting into open source projects. We lead a number of open source projects.
Mostly
We
in the
do
high
not-
performance computing space, right?
Yeah, a lot of them in high performance computing space, but Rocky's all over the place. Like, it's much more than just high performance computing. And we don't host any of those projects within the confines of CIQ. So we put them all outside, and we want the community to run them all. Another project that I created, Singularity, which is a container system in high performance computing, we moved it into the Linux Foundation because we did not want to control or hold it hostage. And even companies that have the best of intentions on their open source projects, that they're not going to hold it hostage. They're not gonna, it's a natural phenomena for conversations from the engineers, for leadership and whatnot, to start happening behind closed doors. I know, I've seen it, I've been there, I've done it, I've learned from it, and I won't do it again. So when we moved Singularity into the Linux Foundation, we renamed it to Apptainer per the requirements or requests of the Linux Foundation, but it is no longer under CIQ. It is out there in the community. CIQ now is just a contributor to a community project, which means we can't have any closed door conversations about the fate of that project. So again, if we're going to open source something, we're going to open source something to the fullest extent possible and truly put it out there in the community, so we cannot hold it hostage. We don't want to make business and make money because we're holding a project and thus our users hostage. That is not in alignment with open source. So to the question, I know it just went away, but to the question, Fuzzball is not open source as of this time. Fuzzball is a next generation high performance computing platform that we are building. I'm not going to pitch it or plug it, but it is not open source as of right now. We have plans for open sourcing it, and when we do open source it, it will no longer be within the confines and umbrella of CIQ as a corporate entity. Ascender is brand new. It is completely based on open source. We are not making, as of right now, any changes to it, and if we do, we will abide by the open source licenses, but it is not a project under CIQ at all. So is it open source? Absolutely. It's based on Ansible and AWX. Red Hat has issued some statements suggesting that RHEL clones are freeloaders. How does Rocky add value to the EL ecosystem? So this wording, I've heard it a number of times. I've heard it being called, us being called freeloaders, among other things. I don't even want to repeat them. Honestly, it's not professional. We're not here to do harm to anybody. We're here to increase the utilization and freely availableness of open source software. So what we're doing is we're simply redistributing. We're making it redistributable again, as it should have been from the upstream projects. To call the clones freeloaders is actually not an insult to the clones. And this is what it bothers me so much. It's an insult to all the users that are using it. And that's what I don't like, because the amount of amazing things that are coming out of the users of Rocky, Alma, Oracle, Springdale, I mean, you name it. Like, there is so much value being generated as a result of that. And that value is staying within a completely compatible enterprise Linux ecosystem. Like, this is important. We're not, there's no freeloaders in open source. There's upstream, there's downstream, and everybody's adding value and everybody's part of this community. And if we're going to start, again, relegating who gets access to open source by somebody's definition of who's a freeloader, I mean, I'm sorry. That sucks. That messaging just sucks. Whoever's saying that and whoever's putting that out there, please stop. You're insulting too many people. Stop.
And if you're looking for something tangible, you just have to look at our special interest groups. I mean, Red Hat really has a page that says that they flat out don't make images for Raspberry Pi and whatnot. Whereas we have all these images available that give lots of people a chance to play with enterprise Linux, learn on these cheap little systems, and who knows, they might take their knowledge to their company and go buy a bunch of RHEL licenses. It's I think we sell more Red Hat licenses than Red Hat does, honestly.
And Peridot, Brian, sorry, didn't mean to overtalk you, but Peridot we're giving back to the community. It's a whole enterprise Linux build system. There's been other assets in which we've provided upstream. But talking specifics now, bug reports. I mean, we found a major bug in PPC on 9.2. Nobody knew of this, but people could have been very easily affected simply by doing a DNF update and realizing that, whoa, they just bricked all of their PPC systems. Like this, again, like contributions come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. And I don't like this notion that people are saying, you know, that because we're not contributing to Red Hat's bottom line in terms of revenue, that we're somehow not valuable. That just sucks. That sucks.
I have and again, that's added on to, if you strictly use lines of code committed to either CentOS Stream or upstream projects, then yeah, Rocky Linux, many projects, many Linux distros will come up short by that metric. You know, it's not a, it's a pretty narrow metric, and it's, you know, lots of respect, honestly, to Red Hat and everybody else doing the engineering work. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of learning of code bases to do that. But yeah, to echo you guys, you know, contributions comes in all shapes and sizes, right? And I think I don't want to like announce anything, but to that end, it occurred to me as, you know, someone who's not super familiar with Rocky Linux and all of our users and SIGs and everything, they may not be able to find these great, you know, KDE spins of an enterprise Linux desktop, for example, which a lot of people love, or like the Raspberry Pi or some of the other single board computers that we're trying to port to. And one of the things that, again, you know, self-aware, trying to, you know, do everything in best interest of everyone. I cannot port these to Red Hat Enterprise Linux and redistribute them, because then they would use binaries from Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But I believe myself and others can make a good faith effort to port them to CentOS Stream, or at least contribute. I'm not, you know, I'm going to be asking a lot of people about this in the near future. But at least contribute, you know, the processes to make them, right? Kickstarts, commands, that kind of thing, documentation. And so, you know, I think, to echo Greg and Brian, like, we're trying, right? It's hard, and we have a small team. We have, you know, we have a lot of users, it's true. And we have a lot of enterprise Linux in-house technical knowledge around the, you know, all users, you know, the entire, I guess, Rocky Linux rebuild ecosystem, including Alma, Euro Linux, all these others. We're trying to help. I mean, it's, you know, I get that definition of helping is not, you know, some folks think we're doing more harm than good, but I disagree, just from what I've seen.
To that point, I think it's really important to look. I mean, you could see that there's some heated opinions. And by the way, that question's really good. So if you don't mind, we can bring that up again here in just a moment. But there's a lot of strong opinions and strong emotions that are tied to this, and I'm guilty of this as well. I've been trying to just kind of ignore all the personal attacks that I've personally been getting, which isn't cool. You know, let's talk about this, you know, like humans. Let's not attack. Let's not call each other freeloaders or parasites or anything else of some of the words and whatnot that's been going around. We're legitimately trying to do good things, and we're trying to do good things for the open source community and people in general. So I just wanted to mention, like, we got to bring down the emotional level a little bit, be a little bit more cordial and supportive of each other. And let's see if we can use this as an opportunity to actually come closer together. And I'd love that. Conversations have already occurred between the various other efforts, Rocky Linux, Alma, and there's others now coming into the mix. So we're actually meeting and talking about how to move forward in a more, you know, in a more coordinated effort. Like, these are good conversations to be having, and I'm really excited about them. So let's see if we can just continue to increase the positivity of what we're all doing and our emotional state about this. So this is a great question. Skip, do you want to take this, or Brian?
Sure. So does changing the method of acquiring the sources change the end of life dates? No, it does not. Not at all. You still get the full 10 years out of each major version, and
I have nothing
6
to add.
months for
Like I
each
said,
minor release.
that's
Although depending on your support provider, maybe you're using CIQ or OpenLogic or something like that, you might get extended support for whatever release you're using.
And to echo that, like if something like that were to change, that will be front and center on the website. If that were
Right.
to, if it ever changed, which it's not, but if it did, everyone would know about that. Like we would shout that from the rooftops because, we don't want people, again, we don't like we have a lot of enterprise Linux community users and they don't like getting caught by surprise. And
Right. I mean that's what got us into
yeah,
Rocky
that's kind
Linux
of
in the first
how
place.
Rocky was formed.
So,
Yes.
right. All right. So next up, how does this, if at all, affect backported security updates? I don't believe it does. I mean, as long as those updates get pushed to our help, the same, we're still getting them the same way.
Also agree. Yeah. If we ever lapse in security updates or there's any kind of issue with that, we will let everyone know because that's, again, super important issue.
So I got to bring something up. I'm curious how many of our listeners pronounce it rel versus hell. So just curious. Brian, sorry, not picking on you.
Our hell doesn't seem nice to me. I don't know. I've always heard rel, so I use rel. But
let us know. How should it be? That's a great question.
Can we use sources from Fedora? So that would skip a whole lot of the whole development process there. So no, not directly. That would involve recreating Enterprise Linux Next and CentOS Stream and RHEL, and then Rocky.
Fedora is quite far upstream from us.
Right.
Now, I will say, having said that, there are, so out of about 3,000 packages, there are probably 4 or 5 that you could probably use the Fedora sources for, because just they're odd packages. We're talking like time zone data, right? Like that's the same for Fedora, RHEL, CentOS Stream, Ubuntu even. But they're very, we'll call it negligible, but it's but yeah, that short answer is no.
Okay. What's the probability that funding gets pulled from Fedora as now the preferred upstream is CentOS Stream? So that's that's a bit of a misunderstanding there, because Fedora is CentOS Stream's upstream. Fedora gets the CentOS Stream takes certain tags of Fedora and commits to those long term. So the probability there is 0.
well,
hopefully close to 0. There we go.
But I don't think so.
Yeah.
So hold on a second. So I want to just mention, like, Fedora has a huge amount of community engagement. There's a lot of people associated with Fedora, and it is a fantastic project. It could be discontinued. I don't think it would be, but it could be, because it is owned 100% by Red Hat. There used to be a notion of a Fedora Foundation when they first brought out Fedora, and Warren Tagami came up with the idea. He moved over to Red Hat. Red Hat kind of took over the project and moved it from its original intent was more like EPEL, and then moved it over into being a base operating system. And Core was actually originally called Fedora Core, if you may recall. But they had a notion of creating a Fedora Foundation on this. About a year later, I think it was about a year, maybe a year and a half or so. Don't quote me on that, but if somebody wants to look that up and post below, that would be awesome. They announced that they were no longer going to create a foundation around Fedora, and they were just going to leave it as a wholly owned entity within Red Hat. So they could end of life it. I don't think they will. I think it provides a huge amount of value to the community. But if they did, I think there'd be a huge, I mean, the open source community is really kind of amazing, because anytime that there's a problem or a shift or a pivot that people don't want within the open source, within the world, practically, you know, the open source community seems to be empowered and fueled by this. When Red Hat announced the end of life of CentOS, like we had like 10,000 people join in like a month and a half. Like that is a massive amount of empowerment and fuel going into this. Like we're seeing it again right now. The amount of support we've gotten from the community. We've talked about some of the negative side, but I want to talk about some of the positive side. The amount of support that we've gotten from the community has been overwhelming. It has been so amazing. And we're seeing more people come into Rocky. We're seeing more people, you know, following us and engaging with us and talking with us and supporting us. We're seeing whole enterprises and organizations who do not agree with the stance that Red Hat and others have taken now, and now moving towards Rocky even more. So I just want to caution any company out there that's thinking of doing something that may negatively affect the open source community, because that fires people up and people get together and they solve those problems. And
it's a bit like the
it moves
internet,
quick.
a bit like the internet routing protocols, where anytime there's a blip or a problem or something, it will get worked around, or in our case, redone or revived or whatever. But yeah, there's really, I don't want to say
generally it gets
there's.
And generally, it gets fixed better than it was before. I mean, for example, this incident has only made the EL ecosystem stronger, to be honest. Like Greg mentioned before, now we're having regular meetings across many of the EL distros.
Yeah, I think it's also important to mention, we don't know what Red Hat's going to do, and I'd rather assume the best than assume the worst. We'll have contingency plans, of course, but Red Hat has a very long legacy of being a freaking awesome company. So let's also keep that in mind and remember that as we're thinking through
100%
this.
agree. Yep.
Yeah.
And again, as they say, they do amazing work. You cannot, no one disputes that.
All right. Do we got more questions? I actually love all the questions. This is fun. Let's see. Since you'll need to do more work on the back end to gather the sources, do you see yourselves ever joining forces and sharing with competitors such as Alma?
So
possibly. Brian, you want to take this?
Sure. I mean, we've actually, as we just mentioned, right, we're meeting with Alma folks and other enterprise folks from other enterprise Linux distributions, and discussing the best ways to go about this. I mean, we've even gone so far as to discuss shared source repos and stuff like that. Well, that plan, not sure if that's still happening, but I mean, this collaboration has really helped out, honestly. I mean, we're sharing new ideas, so I would call that joining forces, even if the distros aren't merging or anything. I would certainly call that joining forces, and it's already happened.
This week has been a week of never say never, right? So things that I wouldn't have thought would have happened, they might happen, who knows, but I can't speculate, though. Or rather, I can't speculate too wildly.
That's a great question.
I can take this one.
Please do.
To my knowledge, no one has heard anything from Oracle. I imagine, again, wild speculation, I imagine Oracle has someone in the legal profession watching this.
Someone?
Yeah, someone, or probably multiple people. But I don't know, though. But I have to think they do.
How about creating a new upstream for enterprise Linux where the open source projects like Alma Linux, Euro Linux, Navy, Cloud Linux collaborate and report bugs, submitting patches? So I will say, I cannot lie, this has come up now, and recently it's come up more often. But yeah, Brian, anything you want to touch on regarding this?
Right. So that is CentOS Stream. That's the idea of CentOS Stream. That is where we submit our bugs and patches and such. So I mean, CentOS Stream holds value there. I don't really see a need for a new upstream. I mean, Skip, Greg.
It depends on your definition of upstream here as well, right?
And need.
And well, yeah, true. Yeah. So, yeah, you're quite right, Brian. CentOS Stream is acts as the upstream for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's forked off every approximately 6 months, and again, developed privately, which is kind of what brought about this whole situation. But yeah, this is now when you say upstream in terms of the source code that Rocky and Euro and these other projects are building, and Alma, sorry, don't want to forget them, then that's not really upstream, right? Like Red Hat Enterprise Linux is the upstream. If you mean like a shared source repository or something of Red Hat Enterprise Linux code, like Brian said, that could be in the works, but that's not really upstream though. That's that ends up becoming the source code, right?
Well, and what is truly, I mean, to your point, what is truly upstream? I mean, to me, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is a downstream of upstream, but it may be upstream for us. Like upstream are the individual projects that are being hosted by developers and people.
That's
and
upstream.
well, this is an important point though. So what comprises a Linux distribution is thousands of upstream projects, all compiled together, as we kind of already talked a little bit about, and built in such a way that they're all tightly integrated and work together appropriately and properly. But there's thousands of upstream projects in a Linux distribution. I was recently doing just some back of the napkin type math, trying to figure out, well, how many people, how many contributors and individuals does that account for? And just the back of the envelope math is like, I would say there's more than 100,000 individual contributors contributing into the code of any one of these Linux distributions, Rocky, Red Hat, Debian, Ubuntu. I mean, there's a lot of people. And there are thousands of companies putting in huge amounts of money into all of this as well. And this actually brings me to one of my whys. Like, why is this important to me? And that's a big one. Like, all of those contributions going into all those upstream projects are going in with the understanding that this is licensed and intended to be completely freely available to everyone, right? The open source initiative definition, the OSD, I encourage you to go look up the definition of open source, okay? That is when people contribute to open source, that is what they are thinking. That is their intention. And it specifically states completely freely available, no limitations on distribution to anyone, anywhere. It's freely available. And I personally don't believe that anybody, and I'm not even going to name companies, but no companies should hold that back. When they're developing value and they are leveraging that pretty much completely, you got to put that back into the community. You have to. That's the intention of all of those open source developers and contributors. And if you don't, you're kind of alienating the goodwill and good nature of those companies and individuals who put it out there kind of with that intention. At least, people don't have to agree with it, but that's one of my whys. Like, why is this important to me? And it's because I support open source. So I think we're just about out of time at this point. And I was kind of still waiting, like, for all of those people listening, if you don't watch our podcast or our webinars or whatever often, we normally have somebody who's really good at emceeing these. I'm not, but we normally have Zane and Rose who runs this. They were unavailable today, so sorry. I'm filling the gap and not doing a great job at it, but hopefully there was a lot of good information conveyed. And I do want to thank Skip and Brian for joining me. And Brian at 3 a.m. who still is better
He's
dressed and
hardcore.
still better dressed and looks better than I do. So thank you both for joining and for helping field a lot of these questions. If you do have additional questions and you're watching this video later, please just comment in the video. We have a team of people that watch all of that, and we'll post the questions back over to us on the back end, and we'll make sure to get a response for you. So thank you again. And again, if you're not familiar with what we're doing, encourage you to now I'm channeling Zane now. So like and subscribe, and see you next time. Thanks everyone. Bye.